All right, now we're going to welcome in Matt Zemek, USA Today, Trojan Wire editor. He covers all things Pac-12, USC, and this is a unique week in the college football sphere down here in the state of Florida. We have two matchups involving Florida teams and Utah teams, both of them in the state of Florida. Big rarity, doesn't happen very often, but they both are on the same day and basically back-to-back games. First, we're going to talk University of South Florida is going to be hosting the BYU Cougars. This is a return matchup. They played last year in Provo. BYU handled USF. It wasn't handily, but it was convincing enough. USF actually played okay and pretty decent in that game for 2.5, 3 quarters, and then BYU pulled away late. And then we're going to hit on the showdown in the swamp. Billy Napier's first game as head coach in charge of the Gators, as Kyle Whittingham brings his Utes into Ben Hill Griffith Stadium. All right, let's start BYU first, Matt. Give the audience a little breakdown of BYU. First thing, I'm going to give you a bonus point if you can pronounce the coach's name. That's always the first challenge with the BYU coach.
Kalani Sitake.
There you go. You've already got a check in the box, Matt, on the ledger. So tell us about Kalani and his and the Cougars coming into Tampa to see the Bulls.
Well, the conversation starting BYU begins with this point. Zach Wilson went to the NFL draft, went to the Jets, top 3 pick. And so last year, without Wilson, people thought BYU's offense was going to regress. It did not. In fact, some could say that BYU's offense was as good as it's ever been, or at least, certainly as good as it's ever been in recent years. We won't argue about the Lavelle Edwards 1980s offenses, which were, set a standard all their own. Ty Detmer winning the Heisman Trophy in 1990. But last year's BYU offense, the point being, it was really good without Zach Wilson. And the guy who made it all happen was Tyler Algier, kind of a Swiss Army knife running back who could pound out tough yards between the tackles. He could catch passes down the field. He could work in the flats, in the short areas, in open space. He was a jack of all trades. He could do so many different things. Now he's in the NFL. He's with the Atlanta Falcons. Okay. And so, people are going to wonder, well, what's BYU's offense going to do? But the very fact that this offense was so good without Zach Wilson last year, it means that without Tyler Algier, they're probably not going to miss a beat. And the word from camp in Provo, very positive. And so you got to look at this guy, Aaron Roderick, not a player. He's the offensive coordinator under Kalani Sitake. And Kalani Sitake, let's realize this about Sitake. He's a defense first coach. He has a defensive background. Yep. All right. When you are a head coach, what do you have to do? What's one of the central things you absolutely have to get right as a head coach? You have to hire the good coordinators on the opposite side of the ball. So Sitake with Aaron Roderick, he obviously is doing well there. Before Aaron Roderick, he hired Jeff Grimes. Now, Jeff Grimes is now Dave Aranda's offensive coordinator at Baylor. We saw how well Baylor did last year. So yep. Sitake is hiring excellent offensive coordinators. When you are a defensive coach, you have to get your offensive coordinator hires right. We saw out here in the West what happens when a defensive coach, a coordinator, gets promoted to head coach and then hires a terrible offensive coordinator. We saw that at the University of Washington, where Jimmy Lake, great defensive guy, he hired John Donovan as his offensive coordinator. No one else wanted John Donovan on the market, and Washington tanked. So Kalani Sitake, he's hiring the right offensive assistant coaches. And so no Tyler Algier this year. That the BYU offense is still expected to be very good.
The other part of this game that I think is critical, what BYU's always been pretty good at, is in the trenches, both offensive and defensive line. That's where USF has struggled the last couple of years. Jeff Scott building this offensive line and defensive line depth. I think this will be a key part of this game, will be how well USF can hold up in the trenches on both sides of the line of scrimmage.
No question about it. And, that really leads me to a bridge point, that connects these two Utah versus Florida games, BYU, USF, and then the Utes versus the Gators in the swamp. BYU and Utah, they both have rugged styles, and they both pride themselves on being able to punch you in the mouth. And frankly, those aren't good matchups for week one, either in USF's situation or Florida's situation. You'd like a more volatile team that might have a higher ceiling, but might not be as consistent week to week. But BYU and Utah, boy, they both have a culture of cranking out results regularly, being fundamentally sound.
Physical,
It's kind
very
of like the
physical.
Jerry Sloan Utah Jazz in
Yes,
the NBA.
great
They're
analogy.
not going to beat themselves, and that's not the kind of team you want to play in week one. Now, I'm the editor of Trojans Wire. You'd like to play USC in week one while that team's getting out all the kinks. That's why USC scheduled Rice, by the way, so that it could have an easy opener. You know,
Right.
get out all the rust and learn how to work within the system. So Utah, though, in week one, that's a team you don't want to play because Utah is unlikely to beat itself. BYU is much the same way. So that is a nice little point of commonality between the two Utah schools, BYU and Utah, playing teams from the Sunshine State in week one.
And the last factor I'll mention, and then we'll get to Florida, Utah, is the heat. I think they're playing at 4:00 here in Tampa, BYU, USF, prime time as far as the heat goes. Interesting to see how BYU handles that. Obviously, it's hot out in Utah, but it's elevation, different kind of heat. It'll be interesting to see how BYU handles this humidity in the middle of the day here in Tampa, especially if it's a steamy, hot day down here, relative to what they're used to in Provo.
Yeah, let me ask you, Jason, are you at both USF and the Gators going to wear white road jerseys for this game? Because they should with
Great
the heat
question.
factor.
That's a great question. That's another part. Little thing like that. If BYU and Utah have to wear dark jerseys, just makes it a little bit hotter, a little bit more wet and nasty. So yeah, that's a
if
great.
Jeff Scott and Billy Napier are smart, they're going to do that.
I agree. No, you're right about that, and you're absolutely right. So I think we both think BYU's the better team. Should win the game. But again, these first weeks are the weeks to, if you're a USF and a Florida, you got a chance that you've had all off season to scout these guys scheme wise, that this will be the chance to I would say keep the game close in the fourth quarter kind of week for both teams.
No question. One other point about BYU is that USC played BYU pretty close late last season on Thanksgiving weekend. Actually, it was the night before Lincoln Riley got hired. And USC was a terrible team last year. So did that mean that BYU was just kind of running out of gas at the end of a long season, or was that kind of a sign that there's going to be some regression at BYU this year? That's an intriguing point heading into week one against USF.
All right, listen to Florida Football Insiders with Matt Zemek of USA Today's Trojan Wire. Matt's also part of the College Gridiron Coast to Coast podcast network. He hosts his own podcast focusing on the Pac-12 called Get Off My Pylon. So promote yourself on that, sir.
Oh, well, Get Off My Pylon. It's Western college football, and that's going to be heavily Pac-12, some Mountain West. When there's a really big story in the Mountain West, we'll cover it, but it's going to be mostly Pac-12. And, of course, Utah, along with the USC Trojans, who might cover, and also Oregon, just playing Georgia. Right. So, we're going to have, in week one, we're going to preview Oregon, Georgia. We're going to preview Utah, Florida on our Get Off My Pylon podcast, as well as USC, especially when the Trojans play bigger games than Rice later this season. So let's get at that Utah-Florida game. It's the game I'm going to be talking about on my show, doing it here on the Powers on Sports podcast and the Florida Football Insiders podcast. Utah, key ingredient for Utah, they have their returning quarterback. Last year, Charlie Brewer was the starter in week one. He was the opening day starter. But now Cam Rising gets the keys from the beginning. It's kind of an interesting parallel with USC in that Caleb Williams was not the starter on day one last year, but he is going to have the offense the whole season. So anyway, with Utah, Cam Rising being the starter, knowing that he's the man going into the beginning of the season, that should increase Utah's upside, because if Cam Rising had been the quarterback the whole way last year, Utah probably doesn't lose the San Diego State game for sure. Might not have lost one or two other games along the way, but Utah's record would have been better if Cam Rising was the opening day starter and he had been able to lead that team from start to finish. So the fact that Cam Rising's there and he knows exactly what to do within Kyle Whittingham's system, within offensive coordinator Andy Ludwig's scheme, that's really important. And Florida doesn't have that same advantage. Now, Billy Napier, I think he's set up to be a really good coach, have a great tenure at Florida. I mean, he's already doing what Dan Mullen has not done, and that is recruit at a higher level. And that's only going to get better for Napier and the Gators as we go along. But in week one of his first season, you don't have that established coach-quarterback relationship at Florida. Utah has it. man, that is a big, big check mark for the Utes.
And if Florida fans, if you're not familiar with Cam Rising, remember they had the shootout with Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, a tremendous game where they scored I think they scored, what was the score? 48-45 final in the Rose Bowl.
Yep. That's exactly
they
what it
scored
was.
45 points on Ohio State and lose.
Yep.
I mean, but they showed the firepower that they can move the ball. Rising is a very good throwing quarterback. They have a good running game, back to same kind of physicality. They are rugged offensive line. Whittingham has always been known as a very physical coach, rugged offensive and defensive lines, a lot of good athletes. Utah recruits a lot in the state of Florida. They always have 3 or 4 kids on their roster from the state of Florida as far as recruiting. So you'll see some kids from the state of Florida that you recognize, on the Utah roster. To me, the Utah key objective is containing Anthony Richardson. We're not sure what he is yet, but he's clearly their most dynamic offensive player. They're going to put the ball in his hands a lot. He's going to run the ball. He's going to throw the ball. Containing Anthony Richardson for that Utah defense will be key.
I totally agree. And I would add, Jason, that it's more about making sure Richardson doesn't burn them with his legs. I think in week 1, you dare Anthony Richardson to beat you down the field,
right,
and making the right read and making the proper accurate throw. Where in a week 1 situation, as a defense, coming into the season, and where you might just see some rust, some occasional lapses, you just blow some containment on the edge, or you allow a running lane, and Richardson can scoot for 60 yards. I mean, he's certainly capable of doing that. So if I'm Utah, I play conservatively. I just make sure that the pocket is contained, and Richardson doesn't have running lanes with which to operate.
And Florida's issue is probably going to be depth. I know they've got good play. Their top 22 guys are probably pretty good, relatively comparable to Utah, but it's the depth and the ability to consistently, again, implement a new system where these Utah players have been in this Whittingham-Ludwig system for multiple years now. They know what they're doing. And so it'd be interesting to see what that part of the factor, how that factors in. Last point, we'll get you out of here. The game is sold out. Just announced the game is sold out in the Swamp. You'll have 90,000 plus at the Swamp. You're going to see, in my opinion, guaranteed lock. You're going to see Billy Napier pull some tricks out of the bag in his first game. Trick play, fake punt, something along those lines to get that Florida crowd into the game, get that atmosphere rocking, because he probably realizes that they're undermanned a little bit, that they got to do a couple things. And one, to get the excitement level of the Gator Nation back. They've been in doom the last couple of years with Mullen. Napier's gonna pull a couple things out of the hat here in this first game, national TV, to get just to get confidence of his program back.
Totally agree. And I would just say he better do it very early, right? Because if you're down 7-0 immediately,
yep,
the trick factor or the surprise factor goes down. He needs to do it as soon as possible while it's still 0-0 or even 3-0. Can't wait too long to hold on to that trick play. So
it sounds like you like Utah here.
I do.
I think the game.
I don't think it's a blowout. I think Utah by I'd say 31-20, something in that realm.
I think it's definitely a game going to the fourth quarter. I think Utah will have enough to get through, but I think this is definitely a game in the fourth quarter. If you're gambling on this game, I say either bet Utah minus the number or Florida on the money line. I don't think the point spread is going to come into play. I think Florida is either going to win the game in an upset, or Utah is going to win by 7 to 10 points comfortably in the game. So great work, Matt. I appreciate it. Appreciate you being part of our Gimme 5 segment where we're going to talk about the opponents. We're going to kind of limit it to 5 minutes to keep things moving. Great work. I know you're going to be focusing on all things Pac-12, USC, but again, great knowledge base on the Pac-12 teams, and look forward to checking in with you throughout the year.
Great to be with you on Florida Football Insiders, Jason.
You got it. Good luck with Get Off My Pylon. Hoping Birdie says that there might be a guest appearance by Mr. Powers on the pylon this week. Who knows? We'll see. Have a great week, Matt. All right.
Thank you.